Aloha. Thank you all for coming to this podcast today. We're going to talk about a little different way of getting some help and support with grief. And when I saw this, I thought, what a cool idea. I want to talk to the brilliant person that came up with this because, as things goes on, I'm sure we've all noticed that it used to be that we could write a letter or make a phone call for anything. And we've got so many more options now. And I love how Emma Payne has created this beautiful thing. So aloha, Emma, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Can you tell us a little bit about you and your inspiration for doing what you're doing?
Sure. Yeah. Um, so I had spent about 20 years building web and mobile applications for things like crisis intervention, youth voter engagement. So I felt quite confident in the ability of mobile technology to help us with behavior change and community support. Um, I started my first web company before Netscape existed, so I've been at it. That shows my age.
Yeah.
I've been at it a while. But in 2015, my friend died, and he had asked me to speak at his funeral, which I, of course, agreed to do. But it was a daunting proposition because he was the best friend and also second cousin of my husband, who had died a decade prior by suicide.
Mm.
So, really, what I had agreed to do was fly across the country and see hundreds of people, many of whom I had not heard from in a long time. Um, I was very lucky when my husband died. I did have um, people to support me, but there were a lot of people who I discovered at my friend's funeral just really didn't know what to say back then. They spent 10 years feeling badly because they didn't know what to say. I'm sorry, Emma, too much time had passed. I didn't know anyone who had died before. I was scared to say the wrong thing. And it was really astounding to me that I had spent 10 years not hearing from a lot of the people I would have liked to hear from. And because my husband died by suicide, I invented all kinds of reasons for that. Came up with my own reasons why people might not be reaching out, as we do. But equally, 100 people had spent that same decade feeling genuinely um, guilty, ashamed of themselves for not reaching out. And so, what had been this opportunity for connection instead um, kept us apart. So, on my plane ride home from my friend's funeral, I was like, this is goofy. It's just plain goofy that I spent 10 years not hearing from people, and 100 people spent 10 years feeling bad that they didn't know what to say and do. And I know that mobile technology and text messaging is a great way to do lots of other types of community building. So let's build that for grief support. Um, and I used my plane ride home to map it out. And I assumed that once I landed back at SeaTac, I would get online and see that it existed already, and but it didn't. So then I spent a couple of years while I still had my full-time job, basically taking part of my salary and building a text messaging platform that would text the griever, so expert grief support for the griever, but would also allow them to add in friends and family who want to help. And then we would also send texts to those friends and family who just need some tips and gentle coaching about how to help their grieving person. So yeah, quit my job in February 2019. I've been doing this full time ever since. And that was obviously pretty weird timing to start a grief support company. Yeah, our second year in business was as COVID fell around our ears around the world. So yeah, it's been a ride for sure.
Yeah, I think it's kind of amazing that there's a lot of us that didn't anticipate being in this place because I don't think any of us really anticipated COVID.
No, well,
People always talk about the possibility of a pandemic, but that sounded like a movie script to me. I know, and it's nice that you had it already in place when COVID started.
Yeah, I mean, so a year after I quit my job, we had to pause everything to actually add a whole new cause of death to the system,
Mm,
customize messages based on all kinds of things. So relationship, um, age, time since the death, and so on, and also cause of death. So we actually had to add COVID to the system and worked with Virginia Mason, who was learning early on in 2020 the different things that people were experiencing if their loved one died of COVID. So not being able to be with them at the end and all of those things. And I really did have that feeling about being in a movie script.
yeah.
I just never imagined adding a cause of death to the system and trying to, there we were, a brand new tiny company, but with a year's experience under our belt delivering expert grief support via text message. So safely and from a distance became the words of the day in 2020.
That it's just so amazing. And I love the flexibility you've got with what you do, because so many times people will be searching for support in their grief, and they find themselves in a group that's not their group. Like if they had a child die and they end in a group of widows,
Mm-hmm.
yes, everybody's suffering loss, but it's different. And each of the categories is different, and it's really wonderful when you can talk to people who get you, or hear from people who get
Mm-hmm.
you. And
I definitely resonate with that example, and it is part of what inspired me to create Grief Coach the way I did. I went to one support group. Um, so I was very lucky to have a wonderful therapist after Barry died, after my husband died. And about 6 months in, he suggested I do a weekend support group for people who were grieving a suicide death. Um, but what was not factored in is that all the other people in the group were grieving their sons and brothers, and I was the spouse.
wow.
And it was awful. I think of it still with just so much like angst and pain, because that was the first time that I realized that everyone blames the wife, even if they're,
Wow.
because you were living with him and you should have known, or something. And it was very, very difficult to realize that in one way we had this terrible thing in common. We'd all lost someone we loved to suicide, but in another way, I needed something different. And um, in fact, it was very painful to to be part of that particular group. So yeah, I definitely wanted to find a way for people to get expert support, um, as personalized as possible to their loss. So we have service for widows and widowers, but it's different if you're widowed at 30 than if you're widowed at 80, for example. We have a teen series. We have some messages that are definitely suited for the early weeks and months, and others that are good for 5 years on and 10 years on. So we're personalized based on lots of things.
You have pregnancy issues or
We do
stillborns, anything like that?
Yeah, we do have a series for stillbirths. We are working on one for pregnancy loss, which is a little bit trickier just in terms of how the dates and names work. So we're supporting people after stillbirths, not miscarriages yet.
Yeah,
It's
that,
coming. There are lots,
yeah.
there are lots of new things coming, also pet loss and anticipatory grief. So support after a terminal diagnosis has been given, things like that.
Oh, those are, all of those are so good. I hear from people from all of those different categories, and it's so important.
Yeah,
And I just think it's such a gift that you've got, that you do tailor make what you do.
thank you.
Can you give us an example of what a message would be that someone would get, or the process of starting this for somebody to, if they wanted to sign up, what it would
Yeah.
be like?
Yeah. It's super easy to sign up. You go to grief.coach, you fill in a form, takes about 5 minutes. So you share as much as you're comfortable sharing. If you want to just let us know your name and the name of the person who's died, that's okay. And you'll still get 2 messages a week at least for a full year. If you choose to let us know that Ramadan is important to you and your wedding anniversary, if you've lost a partner, then you'll also get messages around those special dates. So yeah, it's very, very simple. It's not an app. There's nothing to download, nothing to install. So you fill a form in online and press submit, and then your first text comes in right away, and you get them automatically then for a full year. You can stop and start anytime you want by just texting back stop and start. So sometimes people decide that they're not going to get messages while they're on holiday, for example. And the messages are, so we have over 100 featured contributors who help us to write messages based on all kinds of things, based on their area of expertise. So um, people helping us with messages particular to suicide losses, people with expertise and the experience of grief for people of color and immigrant communities, people with grieving a COVID loss, sibling loss, everything you might imagine. So all of those experts help us to craft the text messages themselves. And then the hard part is keeping them short. Where our kind of voice that we try to really stick to is to be empathetic and normalizing, but also practical and actionable, because it is text. We're trying to provide specific, clear tips and suggestions for what people can do in all kinds of different grief situations. So, one that's really popular is when we reach out to supporters, the friends and family who want to help, and remind them that it's great to use the name of the person who's died. So when you're talking to Susan, be sure to use Joshua's name and share a story about something that you remember from him, things like that. So yeah, specific and actionable, and of course empathetic as well, to really try to be where people are along their journey.
Yes, I keep thinking of different questions to ask you about this, because there's so much involved here. How long is a text message? Did it take a few minutes to read, or a moment to read, or?
Oh, I mean, I think just a moment. We try to keep them around 300 characters. So, I mean, longer than a usual text message, I suppose, but
Mhm.
still just something that you can read. We just had a gentleman about 2 weeks ago reach out to our subscriber support team. So we have a subscriber support team who are themselves bereavement people, trained mental health people, and he reached out and he's like, "Oh my goodness, I accidentally deleted all my messages. Can you send them to me?" So we did. We sent him back all of his messages. We had a teenager who said she never deleted any of them, and that she would wait until after third period, and that's when she would go into her room and read the text and think about her mom. And they were tips, suggestions. Sometimes we send a podcast, a 1-minute video about how to support someone after a stillbirth for a supporter who's doing that. So yeah, sometimes little clips, sometimes specific tips. We do follow proper thanatology and bereavement protocols, so we use things like the dual process model to make sure that we're following best practices when it comes to the grief support we're delivering, but hopefully keeping it bite-sized and easy at the same time.
Yeah, wow, that's a lot.
It is a lot. It's very simple for the user. I mean, it takes 5 minutes to sign up and you start getting the text. But behind the scenes, there's a lot of thought that goes into matching the messages with all the different situations. We support 54 different relationships
Wow.
in multiple different ways. So everything from, brother, sister, mom, dad, partner, but also colleague, manager, patient, volunteer, all the different ways that we might be related to people, stepmom, grandmother, and those relationships apply 3 different ways. So there's the relationship between the grieving person and the person who's died. There's the relationship between the grieving person and the supporter, the friends and family who are supporting them. And then also the relationship between those supporters and the person who's died. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's lots going on behind the scenes, but for the user, it's nice and simple. Sign up, get texts, that's it.
Now, you were talking about supporters. So would this be something that somebody who's supporting someone who's grieving could sign up for and have it be relevant to them?
Yes, absolutely. I originally, when I mapped it out, I actually thought that's what would mostly happen. So every grief coach subscription, sorry, I thought I had already said this, but I haven't. Every grief coach subscription allows the griever to add in up to 4 people who want to help and might not be sure how. And this goes back to
Wow.
my experience at the funeral. This is actually what I think is the most beautiful thing about grief coach and where the real magic happens. So the grieving person is getting expert support based on their loss, but those 4 friends and family are getting gentle coaching, tips, reminders for how they can help. And that's really where some beauty happens. we have one
Yes.
we have one subscriber who she shared on Instagram that so her dad had died and she signed up for grief coach and she was getting texts herself and she was allowed to add in supporters all included with the price, so no extra price, and she added in her husband and they were young. You know, her husband didn't know anyone who died before. He can see that his wife is devastated. He doesn't know what to do. And so Sarah, the subscriber, said, I loved the messages you've been sending since my dad died. They're really helping me to understand my grief. But I really want to thank you for the ones you've been sending my husband. He's like, I don't know what you sent him. I never asked to look, but I know that he made a reservation at my dad's favorite restaurant on my dad's birthday.
Oh,
And
wow.
right. And so, and it was so amazing because it's so small actually. And so we asked if we could reach out to her husband and ask his experience. And of course, he's like, oh, thank you so much. I didn't even know that would have been her dad's birthday.
Mhm.
He's a good guy. He wants to help. He hates seeing his young wife so upset, but he doesn't know how because nobody teaches us how. So we try and do yeah, expert support for the griever and that gentle tips, resources, suggestions, reminders about special dates to the supporters as well.
Oh, that's amazing.
That's my
It,
favorite
yeah,
bit.
that's just so fabulous. And I really like that what you're doing is actionable because that's one thing people always ask me, what can I do? Either
Mhm.
what can I do for myself because I'm having a hard time dealing with this, or what can I do
Yeah,
for my friend?
yeah,
And to have something actionable so they have something to do, they're thrilled when they
yeah,
can get that. So I can just see how this is really beautiful.
yeah. I think the actionable part, we spent a lot of time trying to think what our, voice would be because there's so, there are lots of, and Grief Coach, it's text messaging, so sometimes it's the only thing that people are receiving and it feels easy and sort of non-invasive and it's a way for them to get resources on their own time. But sometimes it's an adjunct, hospices deliver it to their hospice families, but they're also offering them therapy and other things. So it can be the only thing that people are receiving, or it can be part of a greater range of support. But I do think it's like, I don't know, there's just something, it is interesting we're seeing, and we see all the replies and reactions that come back to see how people do just want those practical tips. It's that feeling when you're when you know someone who's grieving that you just really don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And you feel as if you have to somehow make it better or cheer them up. But of course, that's not the way that grief works. And so then we coach the supporters that way and say, it's not your job to cheer Emily up. If she cries when you're with her, consider it a compliment. This is, the grief is an expression of the love that she felt for her dad. And thank you for being there to sit with her and listen. And
Wow.
they're like so relieved. The
Yeah.
supporter, like, oh,
That's so beautiful. Can someone give this as a gift to someone who's grieving? How
yeah,
does that work?
yeah, we have gift subscriptions. So same thing, you can just go to grief.coach and click gift subscriptions, and it also works very, very simply. You just put the person's name and email address in there. We give you sort of suggested language, which they will then receive, just as you would imagine for another gift. So they'll get an email saying, Emily's purchased this gift for you. No rush to get started. Wait until you're ready.
Oh, wow.
Thinking about you. We have sometimes people, supporters, sign up and they don't add the griever at all. We had some girlfriends where their friend's daughter died by suicide, and the mom was not even getting out of bed, but the girlfriends all signed up themselves so that they could get tips, suggestions specific to suicide, how to talk about it. So all year long, they were getting suggestions for how to help a
Wow.
friend, and they never even added her in. She didn't even know about it.
Wow.
Which is actually really smart. Good,
Yes.
good use of it. Use of it too. Yeah. So it works either way.
It's one of the most amazing things that I've heard of in all this work that I've been doing. I just think it's fabulous.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm very, very proud of it. I have a wonderful team. We're a small, still a small team, and working very, very hard to have beautiful texts sent at the right time in as thoughtful a way as we can. So
Do you do it? I know younger and younger people are getting uh, cell phones
yeah,
now. Do you do it for children who've lost someone?
we start at 13. So
13. Okay.
we will text people 13 and above. We do have quite a lot of texts with suggestions for supporters who are supporting a grieving child. So
Oh, that's
the
great.
grieving child might be younger, um, but we're only texting people 13 and above, whether they're the griever or the supporter.
I love the idea of the supporter to a child
Hmm.
to be able to get the suggestions, because they're just lost. For way too long, we've kind of protected children from death and grief, and then they really don't know what to do because they really don't understand what's going on.
Yeah, we have like one of our earliest clients was experience camps. Are you
Hmm.
familiar with them? So
No.
they do camps for grieving children, and it's fascinating, really, to think of, because a camp is wonderful
Hmm.
for the small group of children who are in the right geography, and but they're very expensive to deliver, and it's for a small group, and then at the end the child is driven back to the pickup
Yeah.
area, and they go back to their life, and the person that's picking up is probably also grieving, and really it's that grieving mom who's doing the pickup who also we want to support so that she can in turn support the child. um, So I actually really like the way that Grief Coach works in this situation where it's a grieving child and the supporter. If it's a teenager, they can get texts for themselves, um,
Hmm.
but the people around them can be getting suggestions for how to help a child as well. My director of operations is from hospice bereavement and has 17 years experience working with um, children and teens. I think we're particularly good at this part.
Oh, that's wonderful. It, I just, I admire what you're doing. It just is such, it's needed. It's really needed. And it's so relevant by doing, everybody's getting texts all the time. And to be able to get a text that's useful, meaningful,
That's what I thought
supportive.
on my plane ride home at the very beginning of this. That's what I thought. I'm like, this is just an easy, in a way, thing to do
Hmm.
because we use text for everything. Okay, you need to get your car tuned up, or you got to, we use it for everything. And I really was shocked to see that there wasn't anything like that for grief. At the time when I was coming back from that funeral, it was December 2015. There were not even grief apps. Now there are some. There's some new grief
Hmm.
apps that are coming on to the market, but it was surprising, really, because I've really come to believe that bereavement care is healthcare.
Hmm.
When we're grieving, we're at risk for all kinds of things: anxiety and depression and substance use and sleeplessness and illness and suicidal ideation and all the things. So when someone is supported in their grief, we see a reduction in those outcomes, but yet it's just so overlooked. It's
Yes.
just completely overlooked by the healthcare system as it is now. So we're
Yeah.
working on that part too.
Yeah. I've heard all kinds of different stories with people that go to their doctor in early grief and he goes, here's a prescription for antidepressants, and they go,
Right.
am I depressed? Is that what's wrong? That they don't kind of
No,
know
because
what to do.
there's a huge shortage of expert bereavement professionals. Most therapists don't have any experience in grief. Now the DSM, just this recent update to the DSM a few months ago, has this prolonged grief disorder thing in which many bereavement people disagree strongly with. The idea that there could then be a grief pill, like, or that it would be a diagnosis if somebody whose child was shot is, quote, still um, struggling a year after they died, and that we should diagnose this is, certainly a very contentious issue. I I remember it seems important to me to recognize that people advocating for that also are doing it because they care very much about their grief experience, and we want it to be recognized. It would be nice if our insurance companies were actually going to cover grief support because they understood that this was going to help us um, have a healthy grieving experience and not struggle with depression and anxiety and sleeplessness and things. So,
Yeah,
two cents.
I understand why they wanted to do something, and that's what they chose to do with the DSM.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the whole insurance thing. If you don't have one of the appropriate diagnoses, then you can't get paid. And so it's all
Yeah,
about money, which is
all about
ridiculous.
money. It's ridiculous, and it's really, it's an interesting time in grief support right now. The CDC just during the pandemic started to measure bereavement. They never had before. They used to just count deaths. So they put out studies and data saying that on average 9 people were grieving each COVID death, for example. So now we have at the policy level an acknowledgement that a lot of people grieve, that when we're
Mhm.
grieving, we're at risk for lots of different things. And um, there are ways to provide support. So
Yes.
it is kind of an interesting time for our field of work, I think.
Yeah. And this might already be covered in what you're already doing, but I was thinking about that. I've had people talk to me about how difficult it is to go back to work because their employers don't have a clue.
Hmm.
And I wondered if there would be anything tailored toward maybe the employers
We do,
or,
yeah,
oh, good.
absolutely, absolutely, we do. We have a program for employers. We have employers who have purchased packages of grief coach subscriptions for um, the employee that's returning to work, or colleagues when an employee has died, or manager with suggestions for how to
Wow.
support the employee that's returning back to work. And I think it's actually very uh, effective because, again, we want to help, we just don't know how. And we just yesterday we heard from a gentleman who had been fired, 4 or 5 days. I can't remember if he said 4 or 5 days after a death, was fired by email because he'd missed more days of work. And so I've also been working quite a lot with uh, an organization called Evermore in Washington, D.C., that's pushing for a lot of things like paid bereavement leave to be included with paid leave. It's um, unfortunate that we even would need policies like that
Yeah, but
because
we do. We
you would
really
hope that
do.
employers would recognize this. But of course, it's the lower paid employees that are less likely to have PTO coverage and are more likely to lose their jobs in the aftermath of a death. So it makes me, I'm just thrilled when employers and EAPs come to us and see that, wait, this is an incredibly cheap, easy way for the employee who's returning to work and their manager and their colleagues, right, to get specific, actionable suggestions all year long.
Oh, yeah,
It's
that's
amazing.
great.
It's an amazing thing when employers are doing it, because um, yeah, we're very easy and affordable compared to a lot of other supports like therapy, for example. So,
I'm so happy to hear that you're doing that, because I just, it breaks my heart when I hear stories. I had one person tell me that they had, there was a sudden death
mhm,
I think it was, I don't remember whether it was I think it was a father. Their father died, who they were very close to. And since it was a sudden death, they had to leave work the day it happened. And then they were off for 2 days and the funeral hadn't happened yet. So they really had to work hard to make an arrangement to get off for the funeral.
yeah,
And then the next day they came back after the funeral and they were kind of solemn, a little bit teary. And the boss said, "Aren't you over that yet?"
mhm,
That was the support they got at work.
mhm.
I've had people leave jobs because they couldn't work in that situation. And
Mhm.
it's so
Oh,
sad.
absolutely, unfortunately, very common,
Yeah.
um, very, very common, for people to have no bereavement leave, or maybe they get 2 days off right after the death, but the funeral is 2 days after that, and then they can't get time off. And there's a massive amount of data about grief in the workplace, um, uh, increased workplace accidents, right? Productivity. It's in. Not only is it the right thing to do, but
Mhm.
when employers support their grieving employees, um, in fact, it's better all around for everybody.
Oh, yeah, it's in their best interest to do that, for
Yes.
sure.
Yeah,
You've been mentioning a year. So when you sign up for this, it lasts a year. Is that right?
that's right. 12 months. Yep.
Is there something, is it renewable
Mhm.
so that you can continue to get support after that year?
Yep, we have one person who's in their fourth year right now, which is
Wow.
amazing because that's actually even older than we are. Like she has been our frontline renewer, so the messages don't repeat. If you continue on and
Wow.
if you continue to your second year, you will get messages about the second year and
Wow.
like how to make meaning and being back at work and all those things.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Well, I am absolutely thrilled that you talked to us today,
Oh,
because
I'm
I
happy
can
to be here.
see
Thank
how
you.
much good this is going to do. And for our listeners, we've got a special discount for you in the show notes so that when you sign up, you can get this discount. And I just think that's very generous. And I'm very grateful for that. So all of Emma's information will be in the show notes too. So be sure to look it up and sign up and get your discount and just take advantage of this wonderful opportunity that you have for support.
Thank you so much, Emily. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're more than welcome. And I'll see my podcast followers again next week. Thanks for coming.
Bye.